Good afternoon, and welcome to the Purpose-Built Student Accommodation session that we've got on this afternoon. Let me just get an exciting slide deck up, which will introduce us to the topic for today. I feel like we've got a good amount of people already in the room, so welcome everyone, and we will get kicked off. And so we're here for the Purpose-Built Student Accommodation NABERS Energy Performance Indicator category launch, which is quite a mouthful. We will come to a bit more about what that all means shortly. First, I'd like to acknowledge that we are meeting on many different Indigenous lands and pay my respects to Aboriginal leaders, past, present and future. I'm on Gadigal land today, and welcome from all the different places you're joining from. What we're doing today, talking about purpose-built student accommodation. So we're going to keep this nice and tight, have a bit of an introduction. That's what I'm doing now. I'm going to go into a little bit of background on this project and how we got here, talk a little bit about the benchmark, and then really get to the exciting part of today, which is the industry panel for the purpose-built student accommodation sector. This has been a really cool sector that we have really enjoyed working with, and I think of them as like niche but mighty. So I really wanted this session to focus in on that sector and talk about what they're working on in sustainability and what opportunities there are for that sector, whether you're in the sector or you're a provider who works in sustainability who maybe hasn't really done anything with that sector before. We'll have a little bit of time for question and answers at the end. If you do have a question throughout, please pop them in the Q&A box, which you'll find in the top ribbon of this Teams meeting. We'll come back to those at the end, and if there's obviously if there's anything that we don't have time to address today, we will try and come back to people individually, and that'll also help us work out what other information we need to communicate over time. So a little bit of background on how we got here. The good news is that we are here in celebration, that the NABERS Energy Performance Indicator now includes purpose-built student accommodation. So it is a celebration. We're really excited. It went live in the Perform platform, which is the NABERS rating platform, on the 1st of May. And it is a subcategory of the accommodation category of the NABERS Energy Performance Indicator. You will have noticed both on this slide and when I'm speaking that this is a little bit of acronym salad here. We have a lot of acronyms that we use. NABERS, already an acronym. We use NEPI. It's a little bit of a cute and unofficial nickname for the NABERS Energy Performance Indicator tool, which is our tool that sort of meets the needs of sectors that we don't have a full rating certificate for. And you'll also hear purpose-built student accommodation sometimes shortened to PBSA or just student accommodation throughout the day. So that's a little bit of explanation as you hear those terms this afternoon. So how did we get to this celebratory day today? We've been working with the purpose-built student accommodation sector for quite a few years, but we did not have a NABERS tool specifically for this sector. But it's a sector that was doing lots of sustainability improvements. We knew they were doing sophisticated reporting and lots of tracking, and that there was demand for a third-party verified energy performance and really having that documentation from a certifying body like NABERS. And so some of the providers in the sector were using our NABERS hotel tool with this atypical caveat on the results, because PBSA is obviously quite different to hotels. They're different buildings, different occupation styles. So it wasn't an accurate comparison when you were looking at what that star rating result meant, although all of those inputs and outputs on the certificate in terms of annualized emissions and figures, those were useful for the sector, but you've ended up with a certificate that one says hotel, not very not suited, and not doing a robust enough comparison. So we went out to the sector just over a year ago and chatted to them, said, you know, what's happening in your sector? Where are you now? What are you working on? What kind of uses do you have for something like NABERS? And if we were to, you know, we don't have purpose-built student accommodation in the roadmap to develop a full benchmark anytime in the next few years, but do you want to stay in the NABERS hotel rating? Or would you like to move to the NABERS Energy Performance Indicator? And moving across to the NEPI seemed to be the better preference for this sector. So that was the project that we undertook. And we know that there's a lot to consider in the sector. Moving it to NEPI is, you know, the best gateway step for us to take at this point. So that meant that we could kick off the project now, which we've been working on with many of the people on this call. Over the last sort of 6 months or so, we went out and asked, hey, we're ready to get kicked off on the benchmarking for this. Who's willing to share insights and data? We had a really amazing response from the sector. So we had 14 operators and owners come back to us with data from 130 sites from every state and territory in Australia, which is a really great response, and it's very generous of the sector to share that information with us, which allowed us to do the benchmarking, update our rules and training details within the NABERS Energy Performance Indicator, build that into the platform and go live in May. So it's been a little bit of a ride, and there's a lot of thanks that we have to give in that kind of year-long process. All of these organizations were extremely generous, and whether that's with insights, feedback, working through the tool with us, as well as all of that detailed data that you gave us on your sites, and really allowing us to understand the complexity of the sector, the complexity of buildings and what's happening, as well as your goals and aims. So massive, massive thank you to all of these participants in the project. And a big shout out to NECA, who many of you will have spoken to, who worked on gathering data and all of the kind of back and forth with everyone, and to our Perform team who built it into the program as well. So yeah, thank you. But honestly, NABERS can't do benchmarking and can't do tool development and can't do improvements to the NABERS system without that industry input and feedback. So it is highly, highly appreciated. And yeah, we're here today because of the generosity of all of these organizations and the people behind them. So what have we landed on? We've got a NEPI PBSA benchmark. And it is different to a NABERS energy rating. So with a NABERS energy rating, you're getting a star rating result. If you're familiar with NABERS, you'll know that's a 0 to 6 stars result. And NEPI gives you a dial. So we wanted those to be visually and clearly different tools because they are doing slightly and quite different things. I'll go into the what's similar and different in a second. But it is the kind of biggest thing to take away, but when you're thinking about those two tools, is that the star rating is really complex. It's looking for lots of information, and then it is comparing apples for apples. So it's based on size and location and a whole lot of other attributes around occupation and conditions in the building. NEPI is just a simpler snapshot. And so that comparison around sort of where you're sitting does take into consideration some of the climate and style of building, but it is just a simpler tool and gives you an indication of how your energy performance is going. So both tools, you're getting a certificate, you're getting a report with your energy and emissions figures and annual 12 months of data. Both of them require an accredited assessor and a site visit. They both have that 12 months of data and 12 months of validity, and they both go through audits within NABERS and the certification process. Have touched on that. It's a dial versus a star. It is a less detailed benchmark. There's no data that's going in. The comparison is also on megajoules per square metre rather than emissions in our NABERS star rating. And being a simpler tool, it is also a 50% cheaper certification fee from NABERS and hopefully a less complex process to go through with your assessor as well. To put that into visuals, for our NABERS star ratings for sectors like the hotel or the office, we have a really detailed picture of what that building looks like and what we're comparing it to. For NABERS Energy Performance Indicator, it is just a simpler picture, but it is still giving you a measure that's third-party verified, that's really useful for when you need that verification of your improvement over time. You want a figure around reporting, and I'll bring up what both the report and certificate look like as well. For purpose-built student accommodation, you'll see that it's really looking at rated area, the location type, the climate, and that 12 months of energy. And we know that there are many attributes within purpose-built student accommodation that would have big impacts on comparative performance, but there's that's known knowns that just aren't addressed necessarily through the result on the dial, but some of that we have been able to build into these highlight questions that we have in the report. So you'll see here, here's the certificate, an example of a purpose-built student accommodation NEPI certificate. And we've got these energy and water highlights in there that kind of give a bit of context to where that dial looks like. So we weren't able to build that into the comparison dial, but those highlights give you a bit of context. So if, for example, the energy is a little bit high, but it does include the retail stores or gyms that are on site that we're not able to be excluded, then that context is added in. So it's really about how you use this and how you're interpreting it, that you'll find that the value of those different parts of the NABERS certificate for PBSA. It does, like all our tools for energy, include the renewable energy indicator, which it gives you a breakdown of all the energy sources used in the building. And this is a really, really valuable part of the NABERS tools that we've introduced over the last few years that will give you that breakdown. Really good if you're working towards a renewable energy target, but also if you're looking at electrifying your building and just being able to see that breakdown of where those sources of energy are coming from. And so that is part of the certificate. And here we're landing on the certificate and the report. And like with the NABERS rating report, you're getting that breakdown of the renewable energy and your emission scopes within the report, those highlights on the certificate, and your dial result. So very excited to have this in market. It is a really powerful tool, and we hope that this will be a really useful tool for this. You'll hear from the sector soon, a really engaged and dynamic industry that we hope will be keen to use this tool as a sort of gateway, as a way to start that measurement, and ideally that we'll be able to work with again to develop a full tool at some point down the road. But in the meantime, the NABERS Energy Performance Indicator gives us this, it's the certificate that has purpose-built student accommodation written on it. It is not comparing you unfairly to a hotel, which is very different. And it's a certified by NABERS tool, which is well recognized within the industry. Now, one of the questions that I'm sure we'll get in, and we have had along the way, is how is the NABERS Energy Performance Indicator recognised by other programs like Green Star Performance. We've been working with GBCA, and they're keen to look at updating some of their materials to better recognise that, but they do already recognise NABERS Energy Performance Indicator. And if you have questions particularly around your student accommodation and how that's calculated and recognised, they have said just reach out to them until we can develop a little bit more material and their process of updating their tools. So it is recognised, and that I think especially us being able to add that water element into the report, which is a self-reported part of the highlight section, that's been a really big win for us. And again, we're talking to GBCA about how they recognise that. And yeah, it's onwards and upwards with the tool and with the sector. If you are keen to get a PBSA NEPI, what do you need to do? Find an assessor, go onto our website. We've got the interactive page where you can look for your location or state, and you're looking for the building types for performance indicator. And that will give you a range of accredited assessors. All assessors who are already accredited for NABERS Energy Performance Indicator can now do purpose-built student accommodation. And it's we've updated the rules, so they've got some additional guidance on how to collect that data. So I'm going to hand over to our industry panel now, and I guess very excited for Magali, who is going to lead this industry panel. That this is a sector that's doing some really cool things. So I'll hand over to you. Thanks, Mags.
Thank you so much, Zoe. And maybe you could just check your slides, because it looks like we're seeing a different view from a minute ago.
I'm sorry.
There we go. We can see everybody now. So I'll just quickly introduce myself. My name's Magali Wardle. I'm the Acting Director of NABERS. I'm really excited to see this NEPI tool enhancement for the purpose-built student accommodation sector, and can't wait to hear from this amazing team of experts from that sector who are going to tell us a bit more about it today. So I'd like to just invite our panel members to actually introduce themselves and tell us a bit about their organizations. And maybe we could kick off with you, Pip.
Thanks very much for that. Hi, everyone. My name is Pip Harley. I'm the Group ESG Executive for Campus Living Villages. We operate purpose-built student accommodation in 3 regions across Australia, in certain states in America, and also across the United Kingdom. We are vertically integrated, so we design, build and operate purpose-built student accommodation, but we do so under a slightly different model to some of the other panelists today. So we operate under a public-private partnership with universities, and we develop on their land. I'm sure we'll get into that in this part of the discussion.
Lovely. Thanks so much, Pip. Now I might invite Kendra, if you would like to introduce yourself.
Sure. Kendra Waslick, and I work at Monash University. I'm the Program Director of Net Zero and Sustainability. So sit within our operations division and work very closely with our counterparts at Monash University Accommodation, who leads our on-campus student accommodation.
Great, thank you. Over to you, Chris.
Hello, I'm the General Manager of ESG at The Living Company, which was formerly known as Scape. Scape brand continues as our PBSA, Purpose-Built Student Accommodation brand, which has about 47 assets, including some development assets with 22,800 beds. But The Living Company now also encompasses a retirement living company called Aveo, which has 67 retirement living villages with about 11,000 units, and Rent to Live Co, which is a build-to-rent apartment developer and operator with about 1,600 beds across 2 projects in the pipeline. Unlike CLV, we're off campus, so it's a private company building accommodation close to universities. There are university partnerships that take some beds as a nomination agreement, but primarily it's up to Scape to find the students and fill the beds, and then they travel from our buildings to the university.
Thanks so much, Chris. Over to you, Diana.
Thanks, Magali. So I am Diana Ricoroa, Director of ESG Plus. We specialize in the accommodation sector and atypical buildings, where we help to benchmark, improve, and communicate the sustainability journey of our clients. And I'm here because we've been running a NABERS pilot project with CLV since 2024, where we wanted to test the applicability of the NABERS for Hotels tool in the student accommodation portfolio, and 2, to use the NABERS standard as an asset management tool to help structure the asset management strategy and report back to CLV with a list of improvement opportunities, just to help to communicate the outcome to the stakeholders. So as we speak, we are migrating the whole portfolio from the hotel tool to the NEPI tool. So we're just excited to see what we're gonna cover in the process.
Amazing. Thanks so much. So I think, it's already really clear that there's a lot of variety in terms of how this student accommodation is owned and operated. And it's great to have representation from lots of different sectors here. So I'd like to hear from you, Pip and Chris, first, as sort of coming from that more commercial angle. What's driving sustainability action for your organizations?
I'll go first. Great. Thanks, Chris. So look, we have a few drivers. Firstly, it is our university partners. Because we are operating and developing on campus, the targets and the strategies and the plans that the university themselves has gets extended to us. So they want to partner with an organisation that can also deliver on similar trajectories. So things like net zero targets and so on become important in those negotiations when we're looking to commence the partnership. So our university partners are a key driver for a lot of what we do in sustainability. Secondly, for us, we are the private part of the partnership. So we do have debt and, equity partner investors who are also a really strong driver in what we do. So they, their capital allocators are wanting to ensure that we've got our environmental, social and governance house in order, and that aligns with the portfolio objectives that they have for that capital. So that's generally, they talk to us directly about those objectives and those asks, but we also see it flow through in things like GRESB requirements, debt financing requirements, that type of thing. Those are the two main drivers for us.
Great, thanks, Pip. Chris?
Very similar. I think it starts with the internal business drivers. What's interesting about our purpose-built student accommodation assets is that, like Pip said, we're developing, owning and operating, but the student pays an all-in rent. So there's no split incentive between the landlord and the tenant. The landlord pays all of the energy costs, water, waste, and that's passed through to the tenant just as an all-in weekly rent. So anything we save on energy, water, waste actually goes to bottom line, to net operating income, and ultimately returns for the business. So there is actually a pretty strong internal driver and no split incentive, which is really a great place to be, because you're not having the debate about, I have to pay the capex, but the benefit goes to the tenant. Luckily in PBSA, we don't have that problem. So operational efficiency, and then just the internal benchmarking. When I joined, there wasn't really visibility over which were the better performing or worse performing assets from an energy or waste or water perspective. So there was a bit of a black hole in terms of data and understanding and where to focus effort on improvement and then reducing costs. Like Pip, the finance side is really important. We've got international investors from the Netherlands and France and Germany and Canada who have very sophisticated institutional investment ESG expectations. So I think really my role originated for the business when they were just getting lots and lots of queries from their investors with big complicated ESG data tables and spreadsheets that they wanted filled in, and they realized they actually had to get good at ESG pretty quickly. So the investor piece, unlocking access to capital, and then debt side, we had a treasurer join about the same time I joined, and we were both very keen to implement sustainability linked loans. And I guess we've done two now, a 2023 to 2025 and a 26 to 28 round of sustainability loans. And that's now a $2.7 billion debt facility with the interest rate discount unlocking $1.2 million of debt savings every year if we hit our sustainability targets. So, they're both really big financial drivers. We've attracted the CEFC as an investor, so that's great to have an impact, a domestic government institutional investor helping to drive sustainability as an investor. And then there's compliance, we're at Scape, we're group 2, but for the Aveo business, we're group 1 for the ASSB. So, understanding climate risk and disclosing that. Also as part of transaction due diligence with new investors coming in or an acquisition of assets, due diligence is a big driver for ESG. And then just competitive positioning, as this sector becomes institutionalized and more competitive in student, obviously CLV, Igloo, Unilodge, Greystar, ourselves, there's lots of student accommodation providers competing for the same pool of international students. And likewise, we're competing with the broader residential market. Rental apartments and share houses have typically been where people have stayed. So we have to have a better product, or as good as or better than our competitors, compare favourably against other international jurisdictions, which they might be forum shopping for, like America and the UK and Canada, where they want an English-speaking experience, and then against the rental market as well. So, and like PIP, GRESB and Green Star and all the benchmarking is another big driver.
That's great, Chris. You're making sustainability sound like a complete no-brainer, which is wonderful. Over to you, Kendra, like from that kind of slightly different university angle, are there any different drivers?
Yeah, they're actually quite similar, maybe driven by different reasons, but the whole of life and the operating cost, we do offer gross rents as well. Monash Residential Services operates as a not-for-profit as well, so they need to keep their costs well under control. So again, having really efficient buildings is important. And yes, driven by our internal commitments and standards around net zero, circular economy is driving all of that. And I think what's coming into the conversation for me internally is, although we aren't captured sort of this grey area around the Victorian minimum rental standards, that we are going to have to be competing with Victorian housing that's going to have requirements around efficiency and cooling and heating.
Yeah, great. Thanks for that. So moving to you, Diana, you work with a wide range of industries, kind of all across that residential sector, as a consultant and a NABERS assessor. How have you found working with the PBSA clients and their goals in comparison with other sectors, I guess?
I really like this sector. It's quite fun. PIP makes it fun. So I think it's a great experience. And for me as an assessor, it's a completely different sector to what I've done. I've been an assessor for 15 years. And I can tell you it's very different, the experience from office, and even apartments to go into this sector, or even hotels. I think it's more similar to hotels. So it's very, very, very interesting. Before we assess the whole portfolio, we actually were approached by the facility managers of one of the sites because they recently installed a 90 kilowatt solar system, and they're very, very, very excited and eager just to measure the before and after. And they've been asking their bosses for a while for a tool like NABERS just to help them with their CapEx planning and just with their asset management process. So it was, like a great thing to help them implement. The facility management team is quite special because their responsibilities go beyond the building maintenance. They're quite involved with the students and their well-being, because they are dealing with this group of people that are on site transitioning from young adults to, independent adults. So they really spread thin because they have to cater to their needs. They have to be communicating and educating. So any sustainability initiative that we find, it has to be communicated back in an educational form. Yeah. So that's PIPS, where she comes in with her creativity, so we just provide that data. And the other particularity is just that in student accommodations, the owners own the assets, but they don't necessarily have full control, because the students are operating the HVAC, they are having the showers, they're turning their lights. So they don't have that sophisticated central systems, because sometimes it's not even worth having it. So there's some challenges there of how do you regain control? And maybe there's a debate if, it's worth automating or not. So there's different preferences, I assume.
Yeah. That's great. Thank you so much. And I think that really sort of feeds well into the next question I wanted to ask. So, just setting the scene, I think in general, people perceive the residential sector as not being as mature in terms of sustainability when compared with things like commercial offices. Partly the drivers are very different. So it does, however, feel that PBSA it is one of that first institutional sectors in the resi sector, and I'm curious to see, how does that affect your approach to sustainability? I might start with you, Kendra, for this one.
Sure. I guess I feel like we're mature in the space around student accommodation, because we had during the building education revolution, there was a big increase of student accommodation on campus. So I think we got 1,500 beds and we went Green Star. So yeah, the university has been doing it for quite a while. What is going to be helpful around the NEPI tool is having something to look at operational performance and being able to benchmark. So we're often asked, how are they performing? And all we're doing is sort of comparing back to what their Green Star rating predicted. Yeah.
Great. How about you, Pip?
Yeah, look, I think, you know, Chris and I often talk about this, you know, in other forums and, you know, when we catch up, that he and I have both come from working in companies that have operated in other sectors. And so we kind of are really au fait with what, say, that sustainability conversation looks like from, say, commercial office, or you know, I did work in hotels, and I know Chris has worked in lots of different assets as well. And so I think there's lots of people like us that are now working in PBSA. So we bring that understanding and that maturity of thought in terms of what the strategy needs to do, what the drivers are looking like, what were the partners we need to be working with, how we need to be framing the conversation. But we come up against a building asset class that is not as sophisticated, if you like, as some of those others. So Diana's already touched on it in a bit. You know, in many cases, we've got sort of a garden style property with a bunch of individual townhouses that don't have centralized heating and cooling, that don't have a BMS, that have 1 meter at the gate for energy, 1 meter for water. So we don't have that sort of really, you know, granular data insights that you might have to a CBD office tower. But I think the thinking is there, and the introduction of that institutional investment means that the sector is rapidly heading in that direction, is my view.
Yeah, that's great. And like moving back to you, Chris, so I think Pip and Diana have touched really well on some of the unique challenges that are faced in the purpose-built student accommodation, and particularly in terms of the variety of building types and setups. So love to hear if you have any success stories you'd like to share about, you know, how you've kind of managed your way around all these different shaped and sized assets.
Yeah, I think just touching on that previous question very briefly, like to that point where PBSA is really competing against the broader Australian housing stock. And as everyone who lives in any form of Australian housing knows, that's typically a pretty low quality of building with, you know, single glazing, natural ventilation, poor installation continuity, you know, often condensation, mold, you know, all sorts of problems associated with it being built to a relatively low international building code. And I guess that's what's interesting, is that student has come from that place too, of naturally ventilated, you know, not necessarily air conditioned, no mechanical ventilation system. So it's actually this quite rudimentary product that's quite different from, you know, the very high performing office and industrial and shopping centre assets that we might be used to. So I think that's what's really interesting as well, is there's a huge opportunity to improve against this pretty low baseline, frankly, and bring all that institutional knowledge that Pip spoke about from office and industrial and shopping centres and hotels and other more mature asset classes into resi. And I think that's what's exciting about being in resi, is that it feels like we're at the, you know, start of a very rapid transformation where institutional ownership actually transforms the quality of residential stock. And PBSA is really at the vanguard of that, because it was really one of the first institutional grade asset classes. And then now we've had BTR just starting to be unlocked with the tax changes we've seen in the last couple of years as well. So it's an exciting time to be in the sector. There's huge uplift opportunity. And I guess that's expressed in some of the success we've had here at Scape. We've entered power purchase agreements. So we've, you know, gone from an individual asset level, 1 year at a time electricity contract like you might have on a residential house, to a centralized energy procurement, switching to 100% renewables. And that action alone achieved an over 50% reduction in our Scope 1 and 2 combined emissions. We've still got quite a bit of gas left. So we're in the process of developing a real electrification roadmap. We've got, of the 41 operational buildings, we've got a plan to electrify 20 in the next 4 years. So we're moving pretty quickly on electrification as well. We've done the sustainable living loans. As I mentioned, that's got interest rate discounts and unlocked some capital to do other things. We've had the CEFC come in, and that's driving an expectation around their primary interest was in electrifying residential PBSA as an example for apartments and other sort of multi-unit residential as a case study. And at the same time they're doing the electrification, we sold them we really think if you electrify a building, you get the gas out, we may just end up with lots of gas being built in the grid to cope with the peak evening demand, right? So we might not actually achieve much. So we have to do time of use, demand controls. We have to put a controls layer in at the same time as we electrify, and then try and load shed and, you know, time match our energy consumption, which is really hard to do in a residential context because a lot of the occupancy and usage is in the middle of the night when people are home or studying late. So it's a really interesting challenge. We're primarily looking at that through hot water, which is actually one of the biggest energy consumers in PBSA. You've also got the aircon, and then you've got that hot water for showering, like domestic resi, right? So we've got heat pumps. We're converting from gas to electric heat pumps. We're using low GWP refrigerants for those heat pumps too. So propane and CO2, we've got several of those deployments. So we're looking, I think we've leapfrogged quite quickly to a pretty high tech, you know, running on 100% renewables, all electric, quite efficient, you know, often mechanically ventilated, supplemented by openable windows strategy that really, for me, represents the future of Australian high-rise housing. So it's exciting to be part of that story of like defining what like high quality residential accommodation looks like into the future. Solar, we put solar now, we've got 27% of our assets with solar. We'll be 46 by the end of this year. So big solar rollout, some controls, as I mentioned, with seasonal set points implemented. There's a really good anecdotal story that when we started to benchmark the assets, we found one that had a pool, and the pool had been heated in Melbourne 24/7, 365 all through winter to 30 degrees Celsius for like 10 years. I was like, there's an opportunity. So, you know,
who was actually using it in the middle of winter? I'd love to know.
And we actually looked at all the CCTV, and it was a really lightly used. It was like, just turn it off, right? So there was some great low-hanging fruit as well. The circular economy piece has been quite, I mean, it's kind of outside the NEPI story, but, you know, used mattress protectors, textiles, there's this constant turnover of residents every year who come with a suitcase and then leave with a household worth of stuff that they've got to dispose of. There's textiles, mattress protectors. So we were pulping them up into fibre that was mixed with recycled glass and turned into a ceramic tile that would go into the new building. So some cool circular economy stuff going. We're doing biodiversity net gain across some of the assets too as well. We've got our first pilot in student. We've done 2 of those assets to biodiversity net gain. We had our first couple of assets rated to 6-star Green Star under B1.3. They were the first PBSA assets to get a 6-star. And we're doing Green Star performance across the whole portfolio. And then in 2023, we actually got first in the world for GRESB in residential developments. So we really put Scape and PBSA in the global spotlight because we were beating out like Grey Star in their US multifamily portfolio and GRESB. So yeah, it's good. It's new. It's starting from a low base, but we're progressing really rapidly.
Thank you. It's great to see Australia taking the lead in GRESB in another category too. How about you, Pip? Any additional success stories you've got to share? And also, we've probably only got about 5 minutes, so this time has flown by.
Look, I would just say very similar trajectory to what Chris has talked about. You know, we're in Australia, we're at a smaller scale. So we have 8 villages in Australia, an older property style as well, and you know, on campus as well. So more of that low-rise, spread out garden style property type, as opposed to CBD towers with centralized controls. But we have been doing electrification projects, you know, converting hot water, gas to heat pumps, low GWP refrigerants, solar wherever we can, you know, low-hanging fruit, energy efficiency, all the same stuff. Like, and again, I just double down on the fact that that's the benefit of bringing people in who have all this experience from this other sector and have seen that trajectory over the last 10 years in Australian real estate. Just love bombing that onto like, you know,
learning
PBSA.
curve.
Yeah.
Love it. Kendra, anything you'd like to add to that?
I don't know if it's success story. I was going to talk a bit about challenges as well.
Oh, yes, please do.
Yeah, well, because just brought up, you know, you've got expectations, you know, high international student populations, coming over, but actually in Victoria, the challenge we have on our campuses is that they're freezing cold. And that is just because their expectation of the unit is. So we have issues with space heaters in rooms, and you can tell who's using space heaters. So trying to deal with, yes, there's cooling in summer, but there's actually heating is probably more of a driver for us. Yeah, and I think it is as the drivers for our success stories that because our asset classes, we run like mini cities. So we're doing it across all asset classes. And we've been able to pilot some really cool things, like when we did Gillies Hall and it's Passive House certified, which has helped us learn. But then we kind of step back and go, what are the main things we need to take from that? So, but I think it's not a given that we continue to do it. And it is still always an internal advocacy piece around making sure that we push as hard as possible. It just, not just because we did it once means we're going to do it that way again. So it is ongoing advocacy.
Yeah. Thanks, Kendra. And Diana, from your experience, what are some of the big savings you've seen for PBSA?
Well, we're going to need another webinar to list you all of them.
Yeah, maybe just one.
Very briefly, I'll just combine a challenge with a win. Yeah, I think in summary, the biggest challenge is metering. And when you solve that big challenge, you can have some big wins. So one good example is one of the sites for CLD, because they have the challenge that they don't own the land, they actually lease it from the university. So sometimes we don't have access to some rooms, so we have to partner and work in partnership. So thanks to those partnerships, we were able to run the NABERS process into the meters and validate them, and actually uncover some opportunities there, to fix some things that were not looked at before. And now, it just saved costs, but it is also now we have more accurate data moving forward.
Great. Okay, we have literally 3 minutes left. So maybe in a couple of words, I'd love to hear 30 seconds. What does student accommodation of the future look like? And then Zoe's going to cut me off. So maybe we'll go reverse order now. Diana, what does the future of PBSA look like?
I think it's at a design phase, because as other sectors, the challenge is the existing stock, so that's what it is. So because it's a new sector and it's growing and it's going to be a lot of new buildings, the future is a new PBSA built with sustainability in mind and just factoring in NABERS standards.
Thank you. Kendra?
I would say that the future is that whatever student accommodation that a student comes into as an undergraduate stays in, it sets their expectations for when they go out into the multi-res, high-res, single-family home of what their property should feel like, sustainability, for comfort and experience.
Thank you. Pip?
Look, I think I just focus in on the fact that buildings are for people, right? And I think in Resi, more than anything, we see it in PBSA asset class, making sure that you have this building that has really high indoor environment quality, has great access to nature, that is, running efficiently in the background is where we want to get to, right? That experience that a student has of being in a building that makes them feel healthy and good and able to focus on what they need to focus on.
Great. And Chris, 30 seconds, look at your crystal ball.
All electric, running on renewable electricity, highly efficient, comfortable, healthy. And really, if you want to understand what the future looks like of residential, you just have to go to Monash University and visit Gillies Hall, which is Australia's largest passive house.
Yes.
It's an amazing building. And really, that's my own aspiration in coming to Scape, was to try and lift the standard of new build toward the passive house standard, where we did a pilot on a 55-storey down in Melbourne that had an option to go to passive house. It didn't in the end, but it was 3.5% more construction cost, and it was 67% lower whole building energy reduction. So, you can get these incredible results by going down that route of passive house or passive house principles.
Lovely.
And I'm going to throw in one last thing I thought of. Sorry. Just
go.
about what it is for the future. I was on a panel for Mannix College, one of our off-campus residences, and a lot of students have climate anxiety and feel really despondent and depressed. So anything that the sector can do to help drive change in that and communicate that's happening would be I think, a good thing as well.
Oh, lovely. I'm going to pass back to you now, Zoe, just to close us out. Thank you so much, everyone.
Thank you very much, panel. Much appreciated all of those insights and intel into the sector. We have two really quick questions that I'm going to address before we hang up. One is around, is there an estimation tool? And yes, that is in development. We will send through the update once that's published, and that can be used for your design phase decisions, etc. So that is coming soon. And the other question is, what's the plan to develop a full star rating tool for the PBSA sector? And that is a watch this space. As soon as we can, make the case that this is a sector that really needs that full star rating, and we can attract the funding in to build it, we know this is a sector that's keen for it. So.
And in the meantime, we can collect lots of data using the Energy
100%.
Performance Indicator, which will actually fast track that process. So,
yeah, absolutely. And if you've got interest in it, get in touch, have a chat with us. And the use of the NEPI tool in the meantime helps us get that that demonstration that we're ready to build it and attract that funding. So thank you so much again to our panel and to Magali for leading it. And thanks, attendees. And do reach out if you have any other questions that you'd like to pose to us, or if you'd like to chat about the tool or anything else in the sector. And we look forward to seeing more from this exciting